Everyone thought it was just another sunny Florida morning. But by the time the squad car rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac, neighbors pressed their blinds shut, whispering behind glass. Who would have imagined a mother of two, who barely had time to water her own coffee plant, would soon be handcuffed in front of her children, all because of grass? The grass, that's where it began, brown, brittle, and uneven from weeks of scorching heat. She had begged the skis for rain, tried to stretch her paycheck to buy a sprinkler, but the Florida sun was merciless. And the HOA, well, they were worse than the sun. At first, it was just a letter slipped under her door. "Violation notice, lawn not in compliance." She laughed bitterly, tossing it aside. Her son needed new shoes for school. Her daughter's asthma medicine had drained what little she had saved. Who cared about a patch of dying grass? But the HOA cared. They always did. The second letter came in bold red. "Final warning, daily fines will apply." She read it at the kitchen table while her kids argued over cereal. Her hand trembled. The fines were more than her grocery budget for the week. Still, what could she do? A hose wouldn't fix a drought. A sprinkler system cost more than her rent. And the HOA board didn't care about reasons. They only cared about control. By the third notice, she stopped sleeping. She would sit by the window at night, staring at her front lawn as if sheer willpower could coax it green again. Neighbors passed by, pretending not to stare. Some whispered. Others shook their heads, and she felt it, the silent judgment, the way people looked at her children as though their mother had failed them in more ways than one. But no one expected the knock at the door. It was a Thursday morning when it happened. She was rushing to pack lunches, her hair pulled back, a stain on her shirt from spilled coffee. The knock was sharp, official. Her stomach dropped. She opened the door, and there they were, two officers, and behind them, standing smugly with folded arms, the HOA president himself. Her children peeked from the hallway, wide-eyed. "Ma'am," one officer said, "we need you to step outside." She blinked, confused. "For what? What's going on?" The HOA president answered for them. Failure to comply with community standards, refusal to pay accumulated fines, trespassing violations related to property appearance. It sounded absurd, surreal, like a parody on the evening news. But the officer's hand hovered near his cuffs, and her children were watching. She begged, she tried to explain. "It's just the lawn, I don't have the money. I'm trying, please, I'm trying." But rules don't bend for desperation. Not in this neighborhood, not with this board. And so, in the middle of that bright Florida morning, a mother was led down her driveway in handcuffs. Neighbors peeked out again, phones pressed to their windows, some recording, some gasping. And the HOA president? He smiled. Her son cried out for her. Her daughter clutched the doorframe, tears streaking her cheeks. The mother turned her head just for a second to give them one last reassuring look, but her face crumbled. Because she knew the truth. This wasn't about grass anymore. This was about power. And as the police car pulled away with her inside, a whisper spread through the street. How far will the HOA go? But what no one knew, what the smug president didn't know, what the neighbors recording didn't know, was that this mother had something left. Something no HOA rulebook could silence. And soon, the board would regret ever setting foot on her lawn. Everyone in that neighborhood thought the story ended the moment the police car turned the corner. A mother arrested, taken away for her crimes against the HOA. But the truth, that was only the beginning. Because while the board thought they'd humiliated her, they had unknowingly lit a fire that would not go out. The jail cell was cold. She sat on the metal bench, hands trembling as reality sank in. Her children were at home alone, crying. The neighbors would be whispering, inventing their own stories. And she was nothing more than a headline waiting to happen. "Florida mom arrested over brown grass." She could already hear the cruel laughter. But as the hours crawled by, something shifted inside her. At first it was shame, then anger, and then clarity. They hadn't just arrested her. They had exposed themselves. The HOA had taken their obsession with control so far it had crossed into madness. And madness had consequences. She was released later that night, exhausted, humiliated, but free. Her children rushed into her arms, sobbing with relief. She held them tight, whispering, "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." But as she glanced around, she saw it. The blinking red light of a neighbor's porch camera pointed directly at her house. The whole arrest had been caught on tape. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't powerless. The HOA wanted silence, fear, compliance. But she had something more dangerous than all of that, proof. The next morning, she didn't hide inside as they expected. She stepped outside, still in her worn sneakers, and walked straight to her mailbox. Another violation notice was waiting. She smiled, not out of joy, but out of defiance. Because this time she wasn't going to tear it up. This time she was going to fight. She called a local journalist, her hands shaking as she left the voicemail. "My name is Sarah. I was arrested yesterday in front of my children. My crime? My grass turned brown. I have the footage. You need to hear this story." And within hours, the story was everywhere. First a local blog, then the evening news, then national outlets picked it up. "Florida mom arrested over HOA violation." The comments poured in by the thousands. Some were cruel, mocking, but most were outraged. Mothers, fathers, families from across the country shared their own horror stories about HOAs gone mad. And for the first time in months, Sarah felt something she thought she'd lost: hope. The HOA board was furious. The president called an emergency meeting, spitting words like defamation and misrepresentation. But no amount of legal jargon could erase what people had seen: a woman in handcuffs for grass. Still, Sarah knew the board wouldn't stop. They would double down, find new ways to punish her. So she did something unexpected. She went to the meeting. When she walked into that stuffy clubhouse, heads turned. Some board members looked smug, others uncomfortable. The president smirked. "You've caused quite a scene," he said. But Sarah didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "You've crossed a line, and you're going to answer for it." Gasps rippled through the room. No one had ever spoken to him that way. The president leaned forward. "You signed the rules when you moved in. You knew what this community required." Sarah's voice shook, but it didn't break. "Rules don't give you the right to destroy people's lives. My children watched me get handcuffed over a lawn. Do you understand what that does to them? Do you care?" The room went silent. For a brief moment, even his allies avoided his gaze. But he recovered quickly. "You broke the rules, end of story." And that's when Sarah played her card. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and let the video roll. Her arrest in full color projected onto the clubhouse wall through a borrowed portable projector. Gasps erupted. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The president's face turned pale. He tried to dismiss it, saying it was taken out of context. But the context was clear. Sarah didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. The video spoke louder than anything she could say. When she left the meeting, neighbors who had once judged her now looked at her differently. Some offered small nods. Others whispered, "Good for you." For the first time, the power shifted. But Sarah knew the battle wasn't over. The board still had lawyers, money, and influence. And she had nothing but her children, her truth, and her determination. Late that night, sitting at the kitchen table with bills scattered around her, she whispered to herself, "They think this is about grass, but it's not. It's about dignity, and I'm not letting them take that away." Her children were asleep, unaware of the storm their mother was preparing to face. But deep down, Sarah knew this was no longer just her fight. This was for every family who had ever felt small under the shadow of an HOA. And as she stared out the window at her dying lawn, one thought burned in her chest. If they wanted a war, they just started one. The night after that HOA meeting, Sarah sat alone on her porch. The Florida air was heavy, thick with the hum of insects and the quiet buzz of her own restless thoughts. Her children were asleep inside, but her mind couldn't rest. She knew the president wouldn't forgive her for what she'd done. He had built his entire power on fear and silence, and she had shattered both. Across the street, porch lights flicked on and off. Neighbors peeked out but quickly turned away when their eyes met hers. Some wanted to help, she could feel it. Others were too afraid. Fear had been the board's strongest weapon for years, and now everyone was waiting to see what came next. The next morning, she found out. Another letter in her mailbox. This one wasn't about grass. It was about her fence, suddenly 2 inches too high. It was about the garbage can, left out too long. About the toy bicycle in her yard, not permitted in plain sight. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were circling her like wolves. She slammed the letter down on the kitchen table. Her son looked up, nervous. "Mom, are they gonna take our house?" The words cut deeper than any letter could. She forced a smile, brushed his hair back. "No, sweetheart, they can't take our home, not if we stand together." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. She had heard stories, neighbors forced out, homes foreclosed, lives ruined. The board had money, lawyers, power. She had 2 kids and a stack of violation letters. Still, something inside her refused to break. She wouldn't let her children see her crumble. Not now. So she made a choice. She knocked on her neighbor's door. At first, the woman inside hesitated. Then she opened it a crack. "I saw the video," she whispered. "What they did to you, it wasn't right." Her name was Linda, a retired schoolteacher. And once Sarah opened up, Linda confessed she'd been fined too for hanging a wind chime, for planting flowers not approved by the board. She had paid quietly, ashamed, afraid of making noise. Sarah leaned closer. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. They only win if we stay silent." By the end of the week, more neighbors joined. A father fined for his daughter's chalk drawings on the driveway. A young couple threatened over the color of their shutters. A veteran who had been ordered to remove his flagpole. Each story lit another spark, and slowly the silence of the neighborhood began to crack. But the HOA president noticed. He always noticed. He drove by her house one afternoon in his polished black SUV, slowing down just enough for her to feel the weight of his stare. He didn't roll down the window. He didn't need to. The message was clear. You think you're winning, but you're not. That night, Sarah's phone buzzed with an anonymous text. "Drop this, or you'll regret it." Her hands shook as she read it. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, but then she thought of her children. She thought of Linda. Of the father, the veteran, the young couple. This fight wasn't hers alone anymore. She looked out the window at the dead grass, at the empty street, and whispered, "You're not scaring me. Not anymore." The very next day, she organized a gathering, not in secret, not in whispers, but out in the open. Dozens of neighbors filled her lawn, some nervous, some angry, all tired of being afraid. Kids played in the driveway. Someone brought food. For the first time, the street felt alive again. When she stood in front of them, her voice trembled, but it carried. "They think we're powerless. They think we'll just keep paying, keep hiding, keep obeying. But we're not powerless. We're neighbors. We're families. And if we stand together, they can't silence us all." Applause erupted. Cheers. It was the sound of fear breaking. But across the street, a shadow moved. The HOA president stood at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, phone in hand, recording the whole scene. His face was unreadable, cold, calculating. And Sarah knew this wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a war. The following morning, envelopes appeared on nearly every door of those who had attended. Violation notices, threats of fines, warnings of legal action. The president wasn't backing down. He was striking back harder than ever. Neighbors panicked. Some backed out, whispering apologies. Others grew angrier. The tension split the community in two, those too afraid to resist and those ready to fight. And Sarah, she stood in the middle of it all, heart pounding, children watching. The weight of it pressed on her chest like a storm. She hadn't asked to be a leader. She hadn't asked to be a symbol. But the moment was here. And then something unexpected happened. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the street gold, a car pulled up to her driveway. A man stepped out, suit, tie, briefcase in hand. He introduced himself quietly. "I saw your story on the news. My name, Michael, I'm an attorney, and I think I can help you." Her breath caught. Help, real help. But trust didn't come easy anymore. She studied him carefully, searching his face for deception. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" He glanced around, lowered his voice. "Because 10 years ago they tried the same thing with my family, and I swore if I ever got the chance, I'd fight back." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of something stronger than fear, stronger than anger. She felt possibility. The HOA thought they could break her with handcuffs, with fines, with threats. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated a mother. And as the streetlights flickered on and her children peeked out from the window, Sarah made a silent promise. This fight isn't ending until justice does. Everyone thought the lawyer showing up at her door would be the turning point. And maybe, in a way, it was. But if Sarah had learned anything by now, it was this: victories didn't come without cost. Michael, the attorney, sat at her kitchen table with stacks of folders, his tie loosened, glasses sliding down his nose. Her children peeked from the hallway, whispering, curious about the stranger who seemed so serious. "The HOA has overstepped," he explained, flipping through papers. "Fining you for grass is one thing. Having you arrested, that's abuse of power, and we can prove it." Sarah's chest tightened with cautious hope. "But they have money, lawyers, influence." Michael nodded slowly. "True, but they also have arrogance. They think they're untouchable. That's their weakness. If we're smart, if we document everything, we can turn this around." That night, for the first time in weeks, Sarah slept. It wasn't deep, peaceful sleep, but it was enough. Enough to dream of her children smiling, enough to wake up believing maybe, just maybe, they could win. But the HOA president had other plans. The next morning, her car wouldn't start. Not the battery, not the engine, something deeper. A mechanic later told her the fuel line had been cut. An accident or a warning? When she confronted the board about it, they shrugged. Not our problem. But the smirk on the president's face told her everything she needed to know. The battle wasn't just legal anymore, it was personal. Michael filed the lawsuit. Wrongful arrest, harassment, abuse of authority. The news picked it up again, headlines exploding with outrage. Florida mom sues HOA after arrest. Public opinion was on her side now. Strangers sent letters, donations, words of encouragement. But with every cheer came another blow. The HOA board retaliated with their own lawsuit, claiming Sarah owed thousands in unpaid fines, accusing her of defamation for speaking to the press. The papers landed on her doorstep like bricks, heavy with threats. Her children watched her read them, their faces pale. "Mom, are we going to lose the house?" her son whispered again. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. "No, not this time, we're not losing anything." Yet at night, when they were asleep, she sat at the table with tears in her eyes, the weight of it all pressing down. Could she really protect them from this storm? That's when Michael reminded her. They're trying to break you, that's their strategy. If you give in, they win. But if you stand, you force them into the light, and people like him, they hate the light. So Sarah stood. Court hearings began. The first day, the HOA president strutted into the courtroom in a tailored suit, his board members trailing behind like soldiers. He didn't look at Sarah. He didn't have to. His smirk was enough. But when Sarah took the stand, something shifted. Her voice shook at first, but as she described the arrest, the fear in her children's eyes, the humiliation, the way her neighbors hid behind their blinds, her voice grew stronger. She wasn't just telling her story. She was telling the story of every family who had ever been crushed under the weight of rules that went too far. The judge listened carefully. The courtroom was silent. Even the president's smirk faded, if only for a moment. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Microphones thrust forward. "Do you really believe an HOA can arrest someone over grass?" one asked. Sarah didn't hesitate. "No, and that's why we're here, to prove they can't." The clip went viral. Across the country, people cheered her courage. Mothers, fathers, neighbors, ordinary people who had once felt powerless saw her as a symbol. But symbols come with a price. That night, she returned home to find spray paint across her garage door. One word in angry red letters: liar. Her children cried. She scrubbed at the paint until her hands bled, but the words still lingered, faint but visible. Michael urged her to install cameras to document every threat. "They're desperate," he said, "and desperation makes people sloppy." And he was right. A week later, footage from her new camera showed a figure in the night, hood pulled low, spray can in hand. The HOA president's SUV parked 2 houses down. It was the proof they needed. But Sarah didn't release it right away. She knew timing mattered. Instead, she held it close like a hidden weapon. Meanwhile, inside the neighborhood, the divide deepened. Some neighbors rallied behind her, emboldened by her courage. Others turned cold, fearful of retaliation. And still, the president tightened his grip, sending letters, issuing threats, trying to prove he was still in control. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Board members whispered among themselves, uneasy with his obsession. Fines were piling up, lawsuits draining resources. What had once been a display of authority was beginning to look like a vendetta. Sarah could feel it, the tide was shifting, but tides are unpredictable. They can lift you higher or they can pull you under. One night, as she tucked her children into bed, her daughter asked softly, "Mom, why are they so mean to us?" Sarah kissed her forehead, whispering, "Because some people confuse power with strength. But real strength is standing when no one else will." And as she turned out the light, her own words echoed in her chest. Strength, that's all she had left. But soon, the president would push too far. And when he did, the secret video waiting on her phone would turn everything upside down. Everyone thought the courtroom testimony had been Sarah's strongest moment. But the truth? Her greatest weapon hadn't even been revealed yet. It was sitting quietly on her phone, tucked away like a match waiting for dry kindling. and when she finally struck it, the whole neighborhood would catch fire. The days dragged on after the vandalism. The word liar still faintly stained her garage, even after layers of paint. Her children avoided playing outside, their laughter replaced by nervous glances over their shoulders. Neighbors who once smiled now crossed the street to avoid choosing sides. But Sarah held steady. Every violation notice, every whispered threat, every sleepless night, she gathered them like evidence. Because deep down she knew, when the truth finally came out, it would be undeniable. Michael warned her to be patient. "We'll present the video when it does the most damage. If we reveal it too soon, they'll spin it, twist it. But if we wait, they'll bury themselves first." And bury themselves they did. At the next court hearing, the HOA president doubled down. He painted Sarah as unstable, accused her of exaggerating, claimed the arrest had been procedural. He even smirked as he said, "This is about responsibility. If every homeowner ignored the rules, what kind of community would we have?" Sarah clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Responsibility. That word echoed like poison. Was it responsible to humiliate a mother in front of her children, to spray paint her house, to slash her car? When her turn came, she didn't answer with rage. She answered with quiet dignity. Responsibility is caring for your neighbors, not controlling them. Responsibility is protecting children, not traumatizing them. And this board has forgotten that. The room was still. Even the judge leaned forward. But the president wasn't shaken. He leaned back in his chair, smug as ever, because in his mind he was untouchable. That's when Sarah decided it was time. The very next day, she called for a neighborhood meeting, not in the stuffy clubhouse controlled by the board, but on her own front lawn. People came, cautiously at first, then in waves. Some came out of curiosity, others out of anger, and a few came simply because they were tired of living in silence. Sarah stood tall, her children at her side, Michael nearby. And then she played the video. The projector lit up against her garage door, the same one that had been scarred with spray paint. The footage rolled, a figure in the night, hood pulled low, spray can in hand. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like sparks. Then in the corner of the frame, the SUV. The same polished black SUV that everyone recognized. Gasps, a woman in the back covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "That's him." The figure sprayed across her garage, stepped back, glanced around. And then, clear as day, the face beneath the hood came into focus. It was him, the president. The crowd erupted. Shouts, disbelief, outrage. Years of whispered fear broke into open fury. Sarah's children clung to her, wide-eyed, as neighbors surged forward, demanding answers. The president wasn't there to defend himself, but his absence spoke louder than words. By the time the video hit social media that night, it was unstoppable. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. HOA president caught vandalizing home of mom he had arrested. The story spread like wildfire. The board scrambled. Some members resigned within days, unwilling to go down with him. Others tried to distance themselves, insisting they had no knowledge of his actions. But it was too late. The damage was done. And Sarah, for the first time, she felt the tide turning. Strangers reached out, offering support. Lawyers from across the state called, volunteering help. Donations poured in to cover her legal fees. But beneath the relief, she felt something else too, fear, because she knew a man like him wouldn't go quietly. Her fear proved right. One night, as she tucked her children in, she heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. She peeked through the blinds. The black SUV, parked across the street, engine idling, headlights off. Her heart pounded. She grabbed her phone, ready to call Michael, ready to call anyone. But after a long, tense minute, the SUV pulled away. Still, the message was clear. He wasn't done. The next day, Sarah walked to the mailbox, shoulders squared, eyes set. Inside was no violation letter this time. Just a single sheet of paper with 6 words scrawled in angry ink. "This isn't over, you'll pay." Her breath caught, she looked up, scanning the street. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. For the first time, she wondered, was she truly safe? Were her children? Michael insisted on filing for a restraining order. The judge granted it quickly, the video evidence impossible to ignore. But even with the order, Sarah knew the war wasn't finished. Because this wasn't just about rules anymore. It wasn't even about the lawsuit. This was about pride, about power, about a man who couldn't stand to lose. And though the neighborhood was rallying, though the world was watching, Sarah still lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening for every creak, every shadow. Because she understood something chilling. When powerful people fall, they don't fall gracefully. They thrash, they claw, they destroy whatever they can on their way down. And this president, he was falling fast. Everyone thought the video had ended the battle. The neighborhood erupted in outrage, the news ran the story night after night, and the president's name became synonymous with shame. But if Sarah had learned anything, it was this. A man who built his life on control doesn't surrender quietly. He fights harder, dirtier, uglier. And when he has nothing left to lose, he becomes dangerous. The days after the video release felt almost unreal. Reporters still called, donations still poured in, neighbors stopped crossing the street and instead walked right up to thank her. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a sliver of peace. Her children even laughed again, playing in the yard without glancing nervously over their shoulders. But peace never lasts long when someone is plotting in the shadows. The HOA president disappeared from public view. He stopped attending meetings. His SUV no longer prowled the streets in broad daylight. On the surface, it looked like defeat. But Sarah knew better. She could feel it in her bones. He wasn't gone. He was waiting. Then came the letter. It didn't arrive in her mailbox like the others. This one was shoved under her front door late at night. The paper was crumpled, the handwriting frantic. "You destroyed me. I'll destroy you back." Sarah's hands shook as she read it. Michael filed it with the court, added it to the growing mountain of evidence. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her, couldn't shake the image of her children's small faces in danger because of her fight. That night she lay awake, every creak of the house making her flinch. Around midnight, she swore she saw headlights flash across her window, slow and deliberate before disappearing. The next morning, she forced herself to smile for her children. "We're okay," she whispered as she packed their lunches, but inside she wasn't sure anymore. Court proceedings continued. The judge, after reviewing the video, leaned heavily against the HOA president. "This is no longer a matter of community rules," he said sternly. "This is harassment, criminal harassment." The words sent ripples through the courtroom. Sarah glanced across the room at the president. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white against the table. For the first time, she saw not smugness but rage, bare, unfiltered rage. When the session ended, he didn't storm out like the others. He just sat there staring at her, cold, unblinking, until Michael ushered her away. Outside, reporters swarmed. "How does it feel to be winning?" they asked, microphones thrust forward. Sarah forced a brave smile. "It's not about winning," she said softly. "It's about protecting families from people who abuse power." The clip went viral again. The public hailed her as a hero. But the more they lifted her up, the darker the shadow behind her seemed to grow. A week later, her tires were slashed. All four. Her children were late for school, frightened by the hiss of rubber and the sharp scent of vandalism. Police reports were filed, but Sarah already knew no arrest would follow. Proof was hard to catch in the dark. Neighbors grew nervous again. Some stopped attending meetings on her lawn. Others whispered that maybe things had gone too far. Sarah couldn't blame them. Fear was contagious. One evening, Linda, the retired teacher who had first stood with Sarah, sat across her kitchen table, worry etched deep in her face. "He's unraveling," she whispered. "Men like him, when they lose control, they don't stop until they hurt someone." Sarah swallowed hard. She wanted to believe the law would protect her, that the court would end this nightmare. But in her heart, she knew Linda was right. And then came the night that proved it. It was past midnight. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle. Sarah sat awake, too restless to sleep, when she heard it, the crunch of gravel outside. She froze, peered through the blinds. The black SUV parked right across the street. Her pulse hammered. She grabbed her phone, whispered to herself, "Stay calm, stay calm." She hit record, capturing the still headlights, the shape of a man in the driver's seat. Minutes passed, the SUV didn't move. And then, slowly, the door opened. The figure stepped out, shoulders broad, movements sharp. He stood there just staring at her house. No words, no gestures, just staring. Her children slept upstairs, oblivious. But Sarah couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream, to call the police, but fear pinned her in place. She felt like prey, cornered in her own home. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he climbed back into the SUV and drove away. The silence that followed was heavier than the visit itself. The next morning, Sarah showed Michael the footage. His face hardened. "This isn't just harassment anymore," he said. "This is stalking, and it's dangerous." They filed for stronger protection. The judge expedited it, warnings escalated. But Sarah knew paperwork didn't stop men like him. Restraining orders were ink on paper. He was flesh and blood, driven by pride and vengeance. That night, as she tucked her daughter in, the little girl whispered, "Mom, what if he comes inside?" Sarah's throat tightened. She stroked her daughter's hair, whispering, "He won't, I promise, I'll protect you." But when she closed the door and leaned against the wall, tears slipped down her cheeks. Because promises meant nothing against a man who had already crossed every line. And in the quiet of her darkened house, she realized something chilling. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It wasn't even about surviving the lawsuit. It was about outlasting him, about standing tall long enough for the world to see who he truly was before he destroyed her. And though she was terrified, though every instinct screamed to run, Sarah made her choice. She would not move, she would not quit, she would not hand him her dignity, no matter how much it cost. Because some battles aren't chosen, they're forced on you, and when they are, you fight or you lose everything. Everyone thought it couldn't get any worse. After the SUV incident, after the threats, after the slashed tires, surely that was the peak of his madness. But when a man built on control feels it slipping through his fingers, he doesn't slow down. He accelerates, straight into destruction. The days blurred together with tension. Sarah moved through her home like a soldier in enemy territory, checking locks twice, glancing over her shoulder, memorizing license plates. Her children learned to sleep with the lights on. Even the family dog barked at shadows, sensing something in the air. But then came the phone call. It was Michael, her lawyer, his voice tight. "Sarah, you need to sit down." She sank onto the couch, heart racing. "What happened?" "The HOA president, he's filed a countersuit." Her stomach dropped. "For what?" Michael exhaled sharply. "Defamation. He's demanding $500,000 in damages, claims your video ruined his career, his reputation, his health." Sarah laughed bitterly, but it came out broken. "His health? He's the one harassing me." "I know," Michael said gently, "but this is how men like him fight. When they're cornered, they throw lawsuits like grenades. It's not about winning, it's about bleeding you dry." $500,000. Sarah stared at the wall, her mind blank. She didn't have 500,000 pennies, let alone dollars. She was already drowning in legal fees. When the news broke, the neighborhood exploded again. Reporters swarmed her driveway, anchors debated it on primetime. Some called it a coward's move, others speculated she might actually lose everything. And through it all, Sarah stayed silent, because silence was the only shield she had left. But deep inside, anger burned hotter than fear. He thought money would crush her. He thought the weight of numbers on a page could break a mother fighting for her children. He didn't understand. Sarah wasn't fighting for wealth, she was fighting for dignity. And dignity can't be bought. Court dates multiplied. The president strutted in with his lawyer, polished and smirking, as though the universe had finally tilted back in his favor. Sarah noticed the way he avoided her gaze now, not out of shame, but because predators don't look prey in the eyes. The judge was stern, patient, but even he seemed weary of the constant filings. "This is not a playground," he scolded one morning. "This is a court of law. If I see one more frivolous motion, there will be consequences." The president's jaw twitched. For a flicker, Sarah thought she saw fear. But that night, fear returned to her doorstep. Another note, this time taped to her mailbox, words scrawled in thick marker, "Drop the case or lose everything." She brought it inside, hands trembling, showed it to Michael. He sighed heavily. "We'll submit it, but Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. Men like this, they only stop when they're forced to." Forced, the word echoed in her chest. She thought of her children upstairs, of the neighbors too afraid to step outside, of every sleepless night filled with headlights and silence. She was done waiting. So she spoke. Not to the judge, not to the lawyers, not even to the reporters. She spoke to the world. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, phone propped on a stack of books, her hands shaking as she hit record. "My name is Sarah," she began softly. "I'm a mother, I'm not rich, I'm not powerful. I just wanted to raise my children in peace. But instead I've been threatened, harassed, sued, and stalked, all because of grass that wasn't green enough." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. And now he wants to take my home, my savings, my dignity, but I need you to hear this, he can't. Because dignity doesn't belong to HOAs or lawyers or bank accounts. It belongs to us. And if I have to lose everything to prove that, then so be it. She uploaded it, just a 3-minute video. No edits, no filters, just truth. By morning, it had over 1 million views. By evening, 5 million. Hashtags trended. Comment sections overflowed with support, donations, offers of free legal aid, letters from people across the country saying, "Me too. My HOA did this. My HOA tried that. We're with you." For the first time, Sarah realized this wasn't just her fight anymore. She was standing for thousands who had been silenced, bullied, intimidated. Her pain had become their rallying cry. And the HOA president. He exploded. He stormed into court, demanded the judge silence her videos, demanded restraining orders against her. But the more he raged, the calmer she became. The judge finally saw it, too, the unhinged obsession, the lengths of manipulation. "Enough," the judge declared, slamming the gavel. "This case is no longer about grass, it's about abuse of power, and this court will not allow it." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked. Sarah sat frozen, hardly breathing. The president tried to argue, his voice rising, face flushed, but the judge shut him down again. "One more word out of you, sir, and I will hold you in contempt." And there it was, the crack in his armor, the stumble before the fall. That night, Sarah sat with her children on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fire. For the first time in months, she felt hope wasn't just a dream. But deep inside, she knew the battle wasn't finished. Not yet. Because desperate men don't accept defeat. They make one last move, louder, uglier, more reckless than all the rest. And she had the sinking feeling his last move was coming soon. Everyone thought the fight had ended in that courtroom. The judge had cut through the lies, the neighbors had found their voices, and Sarah had become more than just a mother with brown grass. She was a symbol. But endings aren't neat when pride is at stake. The HOA president wasn't finished. He was cornered, desperate, and desperation always writes the ugliest chapters. The night it happened, the sky was heavy with storm clouds. Sarah sat in the living room, her children asleep upstairs, a cup of tea trembling in her hands. The news still played in the background, another segment about her video, another panel of experts debating HOAs, power, and abuse. She muted it, too tired to listen anymore. That's when the crash came. Glass shattered, the dog barked wildly. Sarah froze, cup slipping from her hands and smashing against the floor. Someone was inside the house. Her breath caught, every nerve screamed at her to run, but her children were upstairs, she couldn't leave. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911 with shaking fingers, whispering, "Please, he's here. He's in my house." Footsteps pounded against the hardwood, heavy, intentional. "Sarah," a voice bellowed from the darkness, "you ruined me." The HOA president. He staggered into the faint light, eyes wild, hair disheveled, veins bulging at his neck. Gone was the polished man in a suit. This was someone unhinged, a man stripped of his mask, consumed by fury. "You took everything," he spat, pointing a trembling finger. "My reputation, my career, my life." Sarah's voice cracked. "I didn't take it, you gave it away." His face twisted, and for a second, Sarah thought he might lunge at her. But the sound of sirens split the night, red and blue lights flashing through the shattered window. Police stormed the house within minutes, weapons drawn, voices commanding. "Hands up now." The president froze, chest heaving, before collapsing to his knees. For the first time, Sarah saw something new in his eyes, not rage, not power, fear. They dragged him away in handcuffs as neighbors gathered outside, clutching jackets against the rain, whispering in disbelief. The once untouchable man, the one who ruled with threats and intimidation, was now just another criminal in the back of a police car. Sarah stood in the doorway, barefoot on broken glass, her children clinging to her legs. She couldn't speak, couldn't even cry. She just held them, listening to the storm, knowing the war was finally over. The next weeks unfolded like a blur. Charges piled against the former president, breaking and entering, harassment, stalking, criminal threats. The judge wasted no time. "You abused your power, your community, and your position," he declared. "You turned rules meant for order into weapons of fear, and now you will pay the price." Years in prison. No more HOA boards, no more letters, no more midnight threats, just silence. Sarah sat in the courtroom that day, her children beside her, and for the first time in months she breathed without feeling the weight of eyes on her. When she left, neighbors lined the sidewalk, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. But the truth was, victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like exhaustion. It felt like scars that would take years to fade. Later, sitting on her porch as the sun sank low, Sarah finally let herself cry, not from fear but from release. Linda, the neighbor who had once stood with her, sat beside her quietly. After a while, Linda whispered, "You saved us all, you know. If you hadn't fought back, he would have kept going. He would have kept destroying." Sarah nodded slowly, wiping her cheeks. "I didn't want to be a hero," she whispered. "I just wanted to be left alone." And yet, heroes aren't always chosen. Sometimes they're forged in battles they never asked for. Weeks later, the grass in Sarah's yard grew tall and uneven, wild in the summer sun. Neighbors noticed, but instead of complaints, they smiled, because the grass had become a symbol now, imperfect, stubborn, alive, just like Sarah. One afternoon, her daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, do we have to move?" Sarah knelt down, pulled her close, and smiled softly. "No, sweetheart, this is our home, and no one can take that away." The little girl grinned, racing back to the yard, laughter ringing through the air like music. Sarah watched, her heart swelling. She knew the scars would linger, the nightmares, the memories, the sound of footsteps on hardwood. But she also knew something else. She had outlasted him. And that mattered more than anything. Because dignity, once defended, can never truly be taken. Sometimes the strongest victories don't come with parades or medals. They come quietly, in the sound of children laughing again, in the peace of a home reclaimed, in the simple freedom to breathe without fear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold, Sarah whispered into the breeze, "It's over, we're free." And for the first time in a long, long time, she believed it. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.